Well, everyone, thank you very much for joining us for our next Ripple Ventures Tank Talk on bootstrapping a startup and how to succeed after a VC says no with Devon Wright. Everyone, I'd like to introduce you to Devon. On the business side, Devon has been with Yelp for the last 3 years as a general manager of Yelp in the restaurant marketplaces group, where he's responsible for setting and executing the go-to-market strategy for all of Yelp's restaurant marketplace products. Prior to that, he was the co-founder and CEO of Turnstyle, a company I know very well and very personally. Turnstyle Solutions was the leading Wi-Fi marketing platform helping local businesses connect with their customers and was acquired by Yelp in 2017. And prior to that, Devon started his career at TD Bank in Toronto, where he was a senior treasury analyst responsible for the wholesale pricing of TD's US mortgage portfolio. On the personal side, Devon was a singer and songwriter with Natural Animal and has some pretty big hits, so check it out on Spotify if you haven't yet. And he's a graduate of the University of Western Ontario Ivy School of Business and currently lives on a boat in the harbor in San Francisco and a farm in Sonoma Valley. Everyone, please welcome Devon Wright. Let's hop into it. This is a very special interview for me personally, and I'm sure a lot of people know why, but Devon was the first person I ever took a chance on as an angel investor back in 2012. So let's hop into the beginning of Turnstyle, Devon. Can you tell us about the original concept of Turnstyle and how it became to be?
Yeah. It feels weird telling you about all this stuff because you were there for all of it. But yeah, you saw it really early on. You mentioned the band. We were a band at the time, me and my co-founders, doing what we loved, just getting out, having a good time on the weekends, playing our songs and DJing. And I was always a little more oriented towards the marketing side of it, frankly, just trying to get close to the fans. I really enjoyed the concept of having fans and when they would get into our music, I just got really turned, the energy turned up when I'd see how excited our fans would get by just having a good time with us. And so I really got onto the idea of I'd love to keep growing the fan base, and what's out there to help a local band or local business do that. And we realized there wasn't a lot of good options. There was a lot of online advertising options back then, and still, tend to be. But advertising's not necessarily what you're going for if you're a band or even a local business. I mean, you have fans already, you have customers already, and you want to try to connect with them. Advertising to your existing customers doesn't really make much sense. You rather would be marketing to them and collecting their information, so that you can keep in touch and build your own list. You don't want to have to keep advertising and paying per click or what have you for your own customers. So we looked around the landscape and there was a lot of online technology that let local or small businesses build up email databases. We were looking a lot at HubSpot at the time as an inspiration. Actually, I still look to them as an inspiration. I think they're one of the best companies out there. But you realize that was good for the online world. There wasn't really much going on to help a local business or a local band, someone with brick and mortar kind of physical customer presence, collect information. There was some POS systems doing it. 5-Star still does it and was doing it back then. But yeah, if you didn't have POS, you were kind of shit out of luck. So we really took a step back, worked with a friend to look at what technologies were out there that could let us connect with our audience. And we realized actually Adrian Wynn, a friend of ours, realized Wi-Fi was totally underutilized. It was becoming more important. In 2012, you can remember data wasn't free. It was actually pretty expensive. And a lot of our customers or fans were 20-something-year-olds that weren't making a ton of money. So Wi-Fi was actually pretty high demand in venues we were in. A lot of people would come to us during sound check and be like, what's the Wi-Fi password I want to get on? And he realized Wi-Fi actually is dumb pipes right now. Everyone's connecting when they're in the store, but the store isn't getting anything back. They're just providing Wi-Fi for free. And what if instead of just giving people some stupid password or letting them get on without any password, we just simply create a system where we actually ask the customer if they want to provide an email or a phone number, and in return, they can have the Wi-Fi. And that was really interesting because that solved this problem of how do you connect with the customer? it was really that was the founding idea. Like, wait a minute, what if we take the Wi-Fi that's in every venue and we bring our own system, our own network, we set it up at soundcheck, and we tell the fans like, hey, you want to stay connected to the band at the start of the show, sign into Wi-Fi, sign in with your email, sign in with your phone number. And not only will we create a system where we now have your information and we can tell you about upcoming shows and we can send you our new songs and stuff like that, but we'll also be able to see if you come to our shows, because you'll be reconnecting to that Wi-Fi at every show. And so it acts almost like a loyalty program. We'll actually get a system of record for how many shows you came to, at what venues. And that should really help us be a lot more thoughtful about how we segment our audience, and communicate. And so that was powerful. It was like, wow, Wi-Fi is underutilized. That's how you could connect. That's how you can get smart about how to communicate with your fans. Why don't we go all in? And that was a start. We swiftly realized bands had no money, so they weren't going to be, we tried to sell it to some band friends of ours and they were like, I don't know, I don't have any money for that. But we realized that the restaurants actually were the ones willing to pay, or the bars or the nightclubs. When they saw us setting the systems up, they would come to us and say like, what the hell is that thing? Our second investor after you, Cohen, as you know, was Nav Zanga, the owner of Wrong Bar at the time, where we had our residency. And he saw what we were doing and he was kind of like, this is janky, but at the same time, like, he had the same questions. The guy owned 4 restaurants across the city, and was paying a bunch of money on advertising, and realized like, yeah, I really am not doing anything to connect with the existing fans, my loyals who are here like every week. What could I do to get more connected to them and to help them stay in tune with what's going on at all my restaurants? Well, the Wi-Fi system was a huge opportunity. And so that was when we were like, oh shit, this is a local business marketing technology, not a local band marketing technology. And that subtle pivot, I think, is what gave us all of our momentum. It was like, bam, that was it. That was the solution.
Yeah, I'll never forget really when you came and sort of had this idea of Wi-Fi. You basically just put the Wi-Fi logo up on a presentation. And I was like, yeah, Wi-Fi. And you're like, no, like this is going to go everywhere, not just in music halls and venues. I was like, yeah, no, I get it. There is Wi-Fi everywhere, but it wasn't being utilized. It was, you're right, an empty, dumb pipe that people made stupid passwords for, and eventually said like, hey, maybe have a guest network for security or something like that. But there was more to it. Monetization of that came later on for the business, but it was really just helping people connect when there was a demand for it. So I love that.
Yeah, and it was, the thing, I think there was that innovation of like, Wi-Fi's dumb pipes, let's use it. And then there was also somewhat contrarian bet that small businesses were sophisticated enough to market. I remember constantly, in fact, I still hear that. And, I'm at Yelp, we're the biggest local platform to help people connect with their local businesses. And we see that all the time. People are like, oh, this business isn't smart enough to advertise. They're not smart enough to ask about ROI. They're not smart enough to market. And it's like, are you kidding me? These are like really successful entrepreneurs. They run their own companies. They raise their own money. They take their own debt out. They've, in many cases, some of these people have been in business for 30, 40, 50 years. They're fucking smart. It's like, it's a matter of, do they have the tools? If they have the tools, someone builds the technology, these local businesses are incredible. And that was contrarian at the time. I don't think it's as contrarian now. It certainly wasn't contrarian online. HubSpot, like I said, and back then was great and has continued to be great because they're taking that bet. They're saying these local businesses small businesses are smart and savvy. We just have to build the tools for them. And so that was really cool too. I mean, that really did pay off because we did tap a need there that continues to be there today.
Yeah, well, let's talk about building those tools, because in order to build those tools, you need to have resources. And unfortunately, I wasn't very wealthy. Some of our other early investors were not very wealthy to pour money into this thing to build those tools. And so you had to find ways to bootstrap it. And you did find ways to beg, borrow, and sort of hustle your way through it. But how did you manage to keep the company alive for the first few years without raising much capital?
Yeah. And like, much capital is the right words there, because we did raise some capital. So I guess that's worth clarifying, right? Like, I don't want to put myself in the category of bootstrapped entrepreneurs, because there are real bootstrapped entrepreneurs out there who like don't even raise capital. They just bring in, they build the whole thing on revenue, and those men and women deserve a ton of credit. we weren't exactly that, right? We did bring in some capital, but to your point, I mean, it wasn't very much. And frankly, it wasn't very sophisticated. There were no VCs. We had a couple small checks from a couple local accelerators. But you're right, like there wasn't much capital. So, and there was a lot of lessons there that are probably worth going through. The first way we did that is we made personal sacrifices. And that is just like if you can't get the capital, you better be the last person to eat, kind of thing, because your team needs you, your customers need you, and you really do have to be willing to do that. And I mean, I don't say that like that's news. I think every entrepreneur who's starting their own company kind of goes through that phase. But we did have to go through that phase, and we always made sure we were me and my partners made sure that we were the last people to take raises. I think our first year we didn't even take salary. The second year, I think we made $12,000. I think the third year we made like $40,000, like I didn't make more than I made at my first bank job until like the month before we were selling the company. So it was like, you got to do that. And you will easily and happily do that if you believe in your business, you believe in your equity. So, because we did hold a lot of equity and we made sure that stayed where we believed most of our win was going to come from, not from our own money. So, or from our own salary. So that was important. I think this is the theme I want to hit on and like highlight. We gave a lot of equity to staff, and you'll remember that, Cohen, like that was super counterintuitive. It still remains counterintuitive, but we gave 25% of the company to employees. Most companies out there do less than 10%. And that was like from the start, we were trying to do that because, one, out of necessity, you can't attract talent unless you're paying for it. And you have two tools to pay for it. You have cash, which we didn't have any of, and you have equity, and you have to be willing to part with that equity. And we very much were. And I want to talk about that theme a few times throughout today, because that was like, started out of necessity, but it has since become, in retrospect, like a part of a personal philosophy of like your enjoyment at work when you're an entrepreneur goes up big time when you think and know that everyone around you holds a part of your upside in equity. That's like, the win is your win in equity is everybody's win. That's something I really tell founders today that I advise, like, start there. Don't just arrive there out of necessity, start there. Put a lot of your company into options.
Yeah.
And that does help you in two ways. It motivates the team. Obviously, they're really fired up to come to work every day when they believe they're aligned to you and they're going to win when you win. So that's one way. And then the second way is it does help others recognize that they too can personally sacrifice on, today's salary to lock in future gains. And if the company is successful, they're going to make a lot more money holding equity than they will have taken a salary. So that was definitely the second one. And then the third thing we did
were pretty big. I mean, let's not overlook those. You guys had very limited income to survive. Chris lived in the office for who knows how long.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Macaroni and cheese for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And yeah, like, trying to get whatever side gigs through the company to keep the lights on was really important. Even negotiating with some investors to throw in some free rent and things like that was really helpful.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And like, you definitely see that when you talk to, as I've been advising some entrepreneurs, like, we can talk about all those personal sacrifices now, and they're like funny, it's like, oh yeah, Chris lived in the office for 2 months. Ha 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 ha. It wasn't funny back then. Like, it really sucked. It was still kind of funny, I guess, when that rat came out at night and then he like decided he couldn't live there anymore because rats were sleeping in the same bed as him. But that isn't really that funny. Like, Chris also got like properly sick from how stressed he was, and so did I, and so did Hunter, and so did everyone. Like, we those sacrifices, they suck and they are hard to make, but you have to make them. I mean, it's part of like making sure there's enough money for your staff and customers. And if you don't do that right, everything goes to zero. So it's a no-brainer thing to do. But yeah, it's totally hard. And anyone who's out there doing that right now, remember, one, it will be funny in the retrospect, hopefully. And two, it's really worth it. Like, it is money that's going towards your staff, which is what we just talked about. And then the final thing I want to talk about is your customers. we focused relentlessly on our customers so that every dollar we took in revenue stayed with the company. And therefore we spent a lot less time worrying about churn and other problems. And that gave us a lot more time to focus on where are we going to get our new sales from and how are we going to get to a cash flow break even as fast as we can. And I think that's an easy thing early on to forget about, like closing $100,000 of revenue that is not the right product market fit is massively costly. Like you get 100 grand on day one and you feel really good about it. But 6 months later, when they're threatening to churn and they represent 30% of your business, and now you've got to pivot around them to try to save them, the toll that takes on your engineers, the toll that takes on your product team, the toll that takes on your customer success team, just like having to, and the stress and the distraction for your founders who are trying to figure out how to stay focused when, the wrong revenue is basically threatening to leave you in a hole. Like you really got to focus relentlessly on getting the right customers in the door and then making sure they're happy every day so that they're not threatening you to churn all the time. That just becomes a huge, huge distraction. I think we did a good job on like focusing on the customer, making sure they were happy. I don't think we did as good a job focusing on getting the right revenue in because we were so strapped for money. We constantly took, gigs that just were difficult to maintain in the long run. So I can talk about that later when I talk about some lessons learned near the end. But that was the one thing we did do well is the customers that we did have, we really treated them well. We went out of our way to make sure they stuck around. So
yeah, you definitely did. And I think founders also, you need to be pretty focused on, those non-vanity metrics, like looking at signed revenue is great, but looking at booked revenue to what actually keeps the lights on and pays for the salaries and stuff is really important. So yeah, it's great you signed a 100,000 ACV contract for the year, but who's to say that customer is not going to churn in 3 months when they don't get what you promised them?
I made sure to include that topic at the end about a lesson I learned at Yelp, so we can get to that. I call it I've been told to call it the North Star, and actually, as there's a lot of good content out there about North Star metrics. So let's talk about that later.
Yeah. So let's move into some of the the problems that the company faced when pitching VCs, and this was at a time when, first off, the VC ecosystem was not very prevalent in Toronto at the time. There was only a handful of them, a lot of family offices, a lot of small micro VCs. How do you succeed after a VC fund says no? And I don't know how many pitches I went with you on, but how many you also did on your own. But, after the VC community passed on investing in Turnstyle, and we can talk about that, how did you push forward in scaling the company?
Yeah, we tried to count this once and we got to over 300 people we pitched. So that's how many times we pitched. And in that 300, we pitched every Canadian VC for sure, and family office and friend of a family office and person who I once worked for. Like we definitely went after it. So, and yeah, almost they all said no. I mean, not all of them, but certainly all the VCs said no. And yeah, that's an emotional journey. I mean, you remember how I was back then. I was pretty negative about it. And I allowed it to be somewhat of a negative experience and kind of lashed out of why is no one believing us? It was kind of shitty. And so I think I want to just say it's normal to feel that way. I think you're hearing no is really hard. But what I would also say is don't let that be the overwhelming emotion forever, because the end of the day, most VCs actually say no with some reason. They don't just say no. They usually say no, your MRR is not where it needs to be, or your churn's not where it needs to be, or your retention metric, or your customer, North Star isn't where it needs to be. And so actually try to you can be frustrated about the no's. And I was, and frankly, I still am on behalf of many entrepreneurs in the Canadian ecosystem, but, we were smart at using it for motivation to keep going and prove those folks wrong and for learning. And the motivation to prove those people wrong is healthy as long as you can make it healthy, right? You're not, getting stewed up and I'd say I went a little too far at times and sometimes it wasn't healthy. So definitely don't do that. Keep it as a motivation, keep going forward. You're not entitled to their money. Use it as a motivation to be right. If you're so smart, if you're so good, then go be right. Go be, they're going to congratulate you at the end of the day anyway. So that's really helpful. And then learning. We just talked about Tony V. I mean, he said no to us for all the right reasons. In fact, I use a lesson he taught me when he was saying no to this very day. And I'd say it's one of the more valuable things I've been able to contribute at Yelp is he walked in our offices, he looked at our balance sheets and he said, well, you know, you're making 80K MRR and you're burning 80K. What would happen if you doubled your prices? And I was like, well, we'd make 160K and we wouldn't burn $1. And he's like, yeah. So you've made your own bed. You need to double your prices. Do that. If you haven't done that, I'm not going to fund you. You could be getting funded by yourself and you haven't even done it yet. And I was like, holy shit, you know, the pain that set in for me of like, oh my God, how much money we've been losing because we were too afraid to command a real price. Because we never really sat in front of a customer and said, you know, what is your willingness to pay? What is the value of the problem that we solve? And frankly, we did end up doubling our prices and we did end up making that money. And he was right. And we just did that recently with some of our customers here at Yelp. We had acquired a company that had same thing. You know, they were reasonably small startup with a wonderful product and just had never truly thought about their price. We ended up doubling their price after the acquisition, about a year later, a year after the acquisition. And actually customers were like, yeah, it's about time. Like so many customers were like, yeah, we were paying $99 a month. I pay more for my napkins. Like, of course you could raise your prices. Like it was amazing. So my point is, long story short, is like Tony made that happen. And Tony actually has become a mentor to me. Like I said, I climbed a mountain with him. He's become a very personal mentor to me. And that whole relationship was built. I've become a better person because of Tony, and he never gave me $1, but he gave me something far more valuable, which is just honest feedback. So when you're hearing no, I think you got to go after why and take it seriously and then use it as motivation to either correct course or prove them wrong. And don't let that shut you down. You know, you can do the things we talked about earlier in the segment to get your own cash flow and to be lean and to make it happen. So
Yeah.
that's one thing. I can stop there if you want to make comment.
Yeah, no, I mean, that actually is an important point, and that had a very lasting impact on me personally. You know, when you pushed me to start Ripple and the venture fund, when I was meeting with early stage entrepreneurs, to be very honest and authentic and transparent with the feedback on why it was a no. Because, you know, just saying no doesn't really benefit anyone. It's really important for us at Ripple, when we say no to a company, we give them a very thoughtful explanation. One, we don't take a lot of time to say no. We don't want to drag out the process if we already know what we know. And what it is that we think is a problem, you know, some of our investments we said no to, we ended up investing in 2 months later. I remember we said no to VoiceFlow when they were just doing children's stories. And then we said, this is the reason why, put us on your monthly updates. We got 2 monthly updates and we brought them back in and we led the next round. So yeah, absolutely important. And I think, you know, the lesson from Tony about pricing, it's really easy to try to undercut competition by lowering your prices, because it's better to have some sales than no sales. And that's what a lot of entrepreneurs look for. But you know, your point there is very valid. Most of the top companies win because they charge more, not because they charge less.
Absolutely.
And you can fund yourself very far into that because you charge more. So go from $99 a month to $250 a month. You may lose 10%, 15%, but you'll make it up way more just because you doubled your prices.
It seems, you know, I think most people are turned off by it because if you just hear what we just said, you think, oh, that's so capitalist, like that's so unfair, you're being a gouger. The way we learned to double our prices, and it's this easy, go to your top 10 customers, give them their Fifth Amendment right, which is basically you're grandfathered in at the low price you're in at right now. Now that you know that, tell me honestly, what would you have paid for this thing? And you know, it sucks. Those 10 customers are going to probably tell you 5 times, I would pay 5 times more than I'm paying right now. And by the way, I just signed on the dotted line that I'll never pay more than the stupid little low price you gave me. And it's going to hurt for 10 customers. But if you have 100 customers, you have 90 more customers who you now understand value you. They value the solution you're providing 5 times more than what you're making them pay. And they're because those 10 customers are representative of that audience, they're the ones telling you, I would pay more. Like, let me fund you. Let me fund your business because I believe in the solution. And you're not trying to go above and beyond. You're not trying to trick anyone. It's like you create a certain amount of value, but ask how many entrepreneurs out there have actually done the work to talk to their customers about how much value that is and charge appropriately. And it's almost none. And it's not bad. It's as the founder, to your point, hearing no is a no to everything you believe in. Seeing a customer walk from a deal is them saying they don't think your product's good enough. That fucking hurts. And so the founder, almost always the advice I give the founder is like, you cannot be the final say on pricing. You have to find someone who's not the founder, who won't take the no's personally to try to see what your product's worth. And that almost always works to get a higher price, and a higher price customers respect, not one that's unfair. That was what Tony said. And that's the final thing I'll say is like, after the VC community passed on us, what Tony taught us and what we, had to do for ourselves is fund yourself as best you can. Price is your best option to start with.
Yeah.
Then cost savings, then, doing side gigs, but like usually there's something missing that the VC sees and they'll tell you, and you can fix that. And that's your own cash flow, and you don't give away equity to get it.
Yeah, I love that, letting your guard down and saying, okay, I'm not going to raise prices on you. I'm going to lock you in, but I'm going to ask for something in return. And that's honesty in what you would actually pay for this. So that's really interesting to hear. You mentioned this earlier on about the 25% in equity you gave up to employees, but can you just dig a little bit deeper in how you were able to recruit a lot of talent with limited resources beyond the ESOP and stuff like that? Because, that was a big part of how the company grew to over 40 people.
Yeah, well, I think one thing I'd heard said, and I've come to believe it. It's like, we were really passionate about the business. Like if you saw us out there, it was everything. We believed in it. It wasn't a side gig. It was like, this is how the world's going to go. It is going to be a place where local businesses are trying to connect with their customers through Wi-Fi, and they're going to market to them, and they're going to have their own tools for that, and we're going to build them. And that was like, we were fired up about it, and we went everywhere and talked about it, and we created our own little kind of religion about it. And that is important. I think you do have to be willing to create a little religion about the thing you believe in. You have to put values behind it. You have to say who you are. And that's going to mean some people don't want to work with you because they don't believe the same thing. But there's a lot of other people that will be attracted to that passion, and they'll see that confidence and they'll want to work with that. Or they'll believe directly the thesis you have about your business. And that's the greatest recruiting thing you can have, is alignment around the values and around the mission. So get clear with your mission, get clear with your values. The first panel I ever did after we sold was with Mike Serbinis. And someone asked that question. They're like, what's the first thing you do? You've started so many successful companies. What's the first thing you do? The guy's like, first thing I do, I sit in a room until I am done. I have my mission and my values. Before a product's even built, before I hire anyone, like I have a thesis on that. And then the second thing he does is like, he hires his team and they sit back down and they make sure that that's the right mission and the right values. It ends up being like a super important recruiting tool, and it gets glossed over a fair bit. So I would say, like, if you don't have that, don't be afraid, don't be upset. But do the hard work to take a week off and think about what that mission is and what those values are, and get them on paper. And make them look nice. Brendan, one of our engineers and our designer, he designed the logo, the color scheme. He actually went out of his way to help us make them look nice on posters and to really make sure they could be hung up around the office. And then we did do that. And I think that's important. You've got to be clear about that stuff. People need to know where they're working. It ends up being a magnet for the right type, for the right person who's going to be the right fit. That helps. That's one.
Yeah. People all overlook that, like, mission statement, integrity, accountability sort of quotes around the office on the walls, because they think it just, is too startup-y. But it actually has a more profound impact than you think, just by just the way people talk about the company outside. The way we try to define culture with some of our portfolio companies is, how would someone describe working at your company to a brand new person that's never even heard of you before?
Yeah.
What do you describe it as?
Great question.
Is it fun? Like, how would you have described Turnstyle to somebody who's never heard of it before?
Like, yeah, I mean, where's my, I have my little values,
yeah, the values
hanging around. I can still keep it, but it was never the smartest guys in the room, but definitely the hardest working guys in the room. And they took the work very seriously, and they did not take themselves very seriously. And that was able to filter out certain types. We had to be honest with that way of being able, with our amount of money and with that kind of philosophy, we weren't able to acquire the person who had built 4 companies before and needed a $300,000 check and a bunch of equity and knew exactly what to do and was going to deliver. And so, unfortunately, they don't want to work in that environment, and they don't want to work for such little money. And so we had to be honest, those types of people weren't going to come work. But the types of people that were going to come work were like people that were doing, they would make this their life, and they would put their head down and they would solve that problem, and they would learn. If they didn't know how to build a customer success team, or they didn't know how to set up Jira, they went and did it. They went and worked the extra 10 hours a day and figured it out and came back with a solution. And we all were like doing that, And so it did attract a certain type of person, and it was the right type of person, so that no one showed up and was immediately turned off. Like, oh my God, I can't, I signed up for something different. And once I got here, I realized like, geez, this is just a bunch of people that aren't the smartest person in the room. And I usually am. And so now I don't want to work here. We had one smartest person in the room, guys, and it was Ryan Freeman. And he was the best, but everyone needs one. That wasn't everyone. And for the most part, I don't think a lot of other people would have, who were used to being, having the smart guys in the room hanging around. I think most of them wouldn't have wanted to work with us. So I'm glad we didn't start there, So yeah, those values went a long way. The values went a long way. The mission went a long way.
Well, it worked because Yelp, as everyone probably has heard, has acquired the business back in 2017 for 20 million US. And it was an incredible success story that a lot of people didn't really get the inside scoop on, but you did it. And so kudos to you, and thank you for changing a lot of people's lives, and including mine. I guess any lessons from selling to Yelp that you would advise early stage founders to consider?
We just talked about the one, missions and values. And actually that's a good way to double down on that topic, because obviously they're good for recruiting people. They're also good at recruiting partners and acquirers, because we had our mission statement, and it was about helping local businesses connect to their customers. When we met Yelp, whose mission statement is clearly helping customers connect to local businesses, it was a match made in heaven. From a missions perspective, it was, because it was like, geez, that's really aligned, isn't it? And you take that for granted again, but like, think about how the SVP of business development is trying to make decisions about who to acquire. The first thing that's going to make a successful acquisition is an alignment on the mission. And if you don't have a clear mission, how can they assess that? They can't. They have to tell themselves what your mission is, and now all of a sudden your odds of them getting that right are pretty low. And then also the values. We actually did an exercise after during the acquisition to take the Yelp values and align them against our values and see what was in common. And there was plenty in common. And I think that also helped us get a sense for that our fit. We would be a fit there as a team. And so I think it was valuable to being acquired by Yelp helped us realize how valuable those mission statements are and values are, to make sure you are a fit for your customers or for your acquirers. That's important. I would say consider your options very carefully was a lesson I learned. Your job, we ended up going with the sale, but obviously before we made that decision, we were forced to go through the difficult exercise of figuring out how to create value for everyone in our company, both financially, not just for but not just for the shareholders, financially, but also career-wise. We had to look at that, and we had to ask ourselves: does a sale maximize that financial outcome and the career outcome for our people? And at the time, for us, it really did, and so we made that call. But there is always alternatives. Just holding your company and running it as is, even though you're taking less money off the table today, gives you a better long-term outcome financially and career-wise. If that's true, then you got to hold. You can't just take the immediate money today. You have to be doing that hard work. So I'd say always be doing that hard work, always be looking. I hear a lot of people will come to me and be like, oh, you sold, that must be great. How do I sell? And it's like, that's not the immediate thing you should be after. I think that's a myth, and you should be thinking honestly about you and your team, if they're getting the most value out of working with the team you have, then hold, don't sell, because once you sell, you're in the hands of someone else. That's just how it goes. You got to be very careful about that. So I'd say just make sure you're always considering those options very carefully. We did that well. And I think that made everyone very happy.
Yeah. You were very open and transparent, I must say, about the transaction with the team and with management and shareholders and early investors. And it's interesting to hear you say how the values and the mission statement and alignment was a big component of the acquisition from Yelp side, because you don't really hear about that. It's always about, is there good IP here? Is there good acqui-hire talent? Are we acquiring customers? Things that are very like quantitative. And it's easy to look at those things and be like, yeah, this acquisition makes sense. But it's those qualitative metrics that you don't really hear much about, that is really honest of you to say, because that's an inside sort of angle that a lot of people don't appreciate. People can get to the end of an acquisition and then realize, there's a total misalignment between the CEO of the startup and the CEO of the acquirer that just don't align, and it could throw the whole deal out. And you
Totally.
never know that until the end. So that's really interesting to hear the alignment on the mission statement from you.
The final thing I do want to just touch on here is the North Star metric, because we mentioned that earlier, and I would say that was the biggest thing I learned, both from being acquired at Yelp, both from watching Yelp do it pretty well, and also from realizing we hadn't been doing it very well and probably left a lot of money on the table during our acquisition. We, because of our lack of funding, often had to focus on revenue and cash flow as a thing that we were aiming for. And we made that a top priority a lot.
Right.
And in retrospect, that did leave us bringing on a lot of customers that didn't drive or derive true value from our platform. And so actually, once we were acquired, Vivek, our head of product, was very smart at being like, great, revenue sounds good, but the reality is you're a pretty small business to Yelp. We don't need your revenue just yet. What's your North Star metric for the product? And I was like, geez, we tracked connections. So it's like liquidity, basically like how many people sign on to Wi-Fi in a given restaurant. And some restaurants would do like 1,000 Wi-Fi signups a month, and some customers would do 2. And we didn't care back in the day. We just wanted the revenue. But his point was, the customer who's doing the 1,000 connections a month is going to see a lot of value in you, and they aren't going to churn. And they're one day will probably be willing to pay more than the person who only does 2. They may pay you the same, but the way they behave and the way they feel about you is very different, because the one who only gets 2 sign-ins doesn't see you as nearly as valuable. And so he asked that question, and we were like, geez, and we did the look, and we realized like well more than half our customers were signed up for the wrong reason. They were signed up for our revenue opportunity, but when we looked deep, we realized they weren't getting the value from our product. We just did it for the money. And so it ended up being that those customers began to churn, and they started to churn, and it took a heavy toll on the company. And the lesson Vivek taught us was, you actually really need to be far more concerned about that value that the product delivers, because all your future revenue, all your future churn, all your future challenges or opportunities come from that North Star. And Yelp does that incredibly well. In fact, the Valley companies, they know that. That's like, I learned that when I got in, and I realized that we don't talk enough about that to our startups back in Canada. That is a real thing that ultimately I wish we'd known a little more about. So that was a big lesson learned. I hope people hear that and can take that a little seriously. Think to yourself about your revenue, of course, but what is your North Star value? And make sure all your customers are getting it.
Yeah, we argue with a lot of our founders about North Star metrics being something that cannot be just revenue, because revenue doesn't work for everyone in the organization. It doesn't work for engineering. It doesn't work for product. It really only works for sales and maybe success and growth. And North Star metrics are something that the entire organization can look towards and feel that they're driving the bus forward on. So, utilization or transactions or assignments or whatever it is, some type of like action item that happens on your platform,
yes,
that is driving all aspects of the business, is your North Star metric. And then the way we say, North Star, OKRs, KPIs, that's the kind of pyramid that it breaks down. And KPIs work at the individual group level, OKRs at maybe the management level, and then up to the North Star. But everything feeds off that. And it's really important to hear you say that after learning it from Yelp, who, you're right, a lot of those Valley companies have done it really well. So speaking of your time at Yelp and learning a lot of things, you're obviously pretty close to the restaurant and hospitality industry. What are your thoughts on it, post-COVID? Where do you see things going, and how do you feel about things now?
I'll caveat what I'm about to say with just saying, like, first off, the restaurant industry and the hospitality industry, they did get smoked. Like I think on Yelp, maybe 7% of our businesses are restaurants, but something like 25% of all the businesses that have declared that they're out of business on our platform are restaurants. So as you can see, like they got hit disproportionately to the rest of the economy. That's pretty heavy hit. So it's going to be hard in that industry, very hard, particularly for the workers there. And that's going to cause a lot of challenge, and that's not gone. They're still exposed. Now that said, I am bullish on the space. I am meaning people are going to want to dine out again. And there are many great entrepreneurs in the restaurant space who are going to sustain. And even if they do shut their doors, will probably open another door and do it again and create the supply for the diner demand that is going to return and is already starting to return. So people are going to eat at restaurants. You're never going to cook better than the best chefs in your city. And these people are really great at what they do. And we are always going to have demand for that. I believe that. We do see that in our numbers. We certainly see in states that are reopening. There's, people are coming back out. They miss going out to their restaurants. And so I think the demand will be there. Supply will be there. It will change though. People are super conscious of safety. And so like, that's a big demand we see, and restaurants are going to have to go out of their way to make sure people feel safe and earn back their trust. And in some sense, the demand's going to return, but just because, my favorite restaurant was ABC restaurant, pre-COVID, it's almost like diners are coming back with an open mind. They're not going to just go back to ABC restaurant. They want to see what ABC restaurant's doing to preserve their safety, to give them options, whether they want to eat in or take pickup and go home. So those restaurants that are doing well, I see, are taking they're providing multiple avenues to eat, whether you want to dine in or maybe you don't feel safe enough. Well, then you can have pickup. That like channel diversification is a real thing. And then also, I think restaurants are, the best ones are doing a great job rethinking what they have to do to earn trust, to make sure people feel safe, and can develop a habit with them again. So I think it's going to come back though. I'm bullish. I think it's just, there'll be some changes around how restaurants have to make sure they're respecting safety and diversifying their channels to make sure they can be healthy in a new normal.
I mean, it sounds like it's the same thing that's happening in traditional businesses. You got to level up, you got to pivot, you got to, go above the status quo and try to figure out ways to add value in different ways that you maybe didn't think before. And whether it's online, safety, different ways of sort of adding value to your customer is important.
If you do want to hear from a restaurateur on this topic, we sponsor this is a bit of a shout out because we sponsor this, but I mean, we wouldn't sponsor if I didn't think it was just great content anyhow. So I'm shouting them out regardless. A podcast called Full Comp. And that's hosted by Josh Kopel, Michelin's rated restaurateur. He has incredible restaurateurs coming on that platform. And the entire goal is to talk about, let's be honest, we just got smoked. We're going to have to change. Let's bring the best restaurateurs from America on the platform and talk to them about, one, how they plan to change, and two, how they've changed before, so that you can have some confidence to realize they've been through 9/11. They've been through 2008. They've been through this. These restaurateurs, like I said, and this is why I have the utmost respect for these restaurateurs. I do not, I give them a ton of credit because they've been through this, man. And you hear from them on this podcast about the stories, like what happened in New York restaurants after 9/11. It was crazy what they had to go through to reinvent and keep themselves alive. And they tell you how they did it and what came out the other side. And then they apply those lessons to the current situation. So really cool podcast if you are interested about why I have a bullish belief in the entrepreneurs that make up our restaurant community.
Awesome. We'll put that in our Coles notes. So I know you're an avid reader and you definitely read probably a lot on the boat and at the farm. So we always love to ask our guests some of their top book recommendations. I have 4 of them here. Can you tell us a little bit about each book and why you think it's important for founders to listen to?
Oh yeah, for sure. So the 2 middle ones, Brick by Brick. I mean, if you loved Lego as a kid, and who didn't? It's super fun to walk through them as a company because you almost never think about them as a company. And they're like a really cool 100-year plus old, I think, or even, they're really old business, who's had to rewrite themselves as a company and reinvent themselves as a company so many times. And they keep doing it. And I mean, it's amazing because as a child, you certainly did not recognize, when they had, you'll remember all the toys they talk about, but you won't realize there's like a whole corporate journey behind the decisions they made releasing these toys or unreleasing toys or going into new categories that failed. And it gives you this, what's nice is, you know, you probably are close to Lego, so you have a bit of a like place in your heart for them, and then it adds this amazing color around what they've had to do as a company. And I'd say the thing that I love most about it is they always turn back to their customer to know where to go next. And if you're interested in what we talked about earlier about getting closer to your customers, to ask them what your price should be or ask them what you should do, this is a book that really tells you, it gives you 100 years of evidence that that's the right move. Get close to your customers and believe in them. And actually, I'd say Perfect Store is another book that reinforces exactly that, and then goes one step further to give you that North Star metric, like in its infancy, and like how it's gone on to drive that business forever. The entrepreneur who built that business is an incredible leader. He built what he did to focus on the community, and what their whole team did to focus on that community and instill values early on around the protection of that community. It's inspiring. And I think if you're interested in North Star metrics, or you're interested in creating culture and values and a mission that can last, that's a good book. What a good read. And again, both those books are really easy reads because you're familiar with them, and you're interested in the journey. I'd say Team of Teams and Loon Shots are both less like kind of biographies of businesses and more like instructional about how to. Team of Teams, I think, helps you really understand how to how the world has changed. As the world gets more complex, you do have to you can't be so rigid in your top-down management. And so like there are timeless practices you just mentioned, like OKRs, that are really, really powerful ways to give the team direction and goals. But the way you execute those OKRs can't be nearly as hierarchical as the OKRs seem on paper. And you have to start getting comfortable arming your team of little teams, each with their own leader and with their own autonomy, to figure out how to best achieve a KR. So you can have that hierarchy of goals, but you cannot have the hierarchy in today's world, with so much complexity and connectedness, and how fast things move. You cannot you cannot manage your team in that hierarchical way any longer. And that's frankly why startups have a big advantage a lot of the times over big companies. And to reinforce that and to give you a little bit of clarity around that, that's what Loon Shots is. Loon Shots is a book that's like, how do you take a really small idea and, a big idea, but a new idea, one that could be revolutionary, and get it to change either a big business that you're embedded in. And that's why I found it very valuable is Yelp's wants me to be creative and continue being an entrepreneur and think creatively. Well, how do you do that inside a big business? That's certainly one area where I learned from this book, but not just inside a business, inside of an industry. You have a company on your roster, On-Call Health. They're revolutionizing an industry that is incredibly rigid, right? So like trying to be inside of the healthcare industry and make change, that's fucking hard. You know, like the not only are regulations there, but the doctors are older and they're used to what they do. And you're trying to go in and take an idea that's novel and technology that's novel and a relationship to customers that's novel, and you're trying to get them to change. Well, here's a great book for research on how do you foster those new ideas and help make sure that they get through what the book calls the 3 rejections. Because you're going to hear no, and it isn't just going to be from investors. It's going to be from customers, and it's going to be from regulators. And this is a great book that talks about tactics for nurturing your crazy ideas, nurturing your big ideas, but also getting through the no's that are inevitable, and and taking from those no's motivation and lessons, like we talked about a little earlier. So totally highly recommend. I think all 4 of these stack up for my top reads in 2019. And I think I read like 40 books in 2019. So like these stand out. These are my top ones for sure.
Wow. These are your top 4 out of the 40 you read in 2019. Great. Well, we'll keep those in the show notes for everyone to circle up on after that. Always, before we say goodbye, we love to ask our guests for any final words of inspiration for the audience to live by.
I'd say along the journey, you're going to have all sorts of pressure, to raise money or to listen to your VCs or money and optimize around the capital and the shareholder returns. And that's all smart. But I would say you got to make sure that you're constantly trying to lead through a sense of fairness and generosity. it's especially when it comes to equity. You know, it's really easy to get sucked into the capital side of your balance sheet because you own so much shares, and it's easier to relate to the shareholders. You spend so much time with the VCs, and it's easy to remember them. But don't forget your role as an employee as well. You are, you know, think of how important that you are to your work is to your company. And then remember that every person that works for you is that important to your success every day. And without them, your shares go to zero. So you cannot decouple the two like we constantly do in business school, saying, oh, our top goal as an entrepreneur, as a business holder, is for our shareholders. Actually, that's true. Okay, fine. Like, you know, from like the business perspective, but the number one way you make your shareholders successful is by having your employees feel successful every day. And frankly, I think having them hold shares too. So they're aligned and they believe in the outcomes of your shareholders. So I would say do everything you can to give your employees ownership of the company and to make sure they win from the upside of the business if there is an exit. One, personally, you will be happy. The happiest day of my life was when we sold, not just because I made money, but because every person, we had 91 people on the cap table and every person made money, 50 of which were employees. And the smile that you all have together as a team when everyone makes money like that is like, you know, you'll never ever trade it. But then on a more macro level, like society has tons of problems today. And this is controversial. It's like, don't take me for it, but my opinion is a lot of it stems from the fact that, like, as a country and as the country has grown in Canada and the US, as the Western world has grown, too many people have been cut out from growing alongside of it. I think that if you look at any chart, you'll see over the last decade and a bit of record growth, very small handful of people made money, the shareholders, the capital owners, and almost none of the labor owners or none of the labor made money. And this isn't to sound socialist. I'm not saying that. I'm saying, like, you are actually able to solve that problem by making sure your workers, your labor, shares in the success of your success. Do not make the mistake of treating them separately than your shareholders. And I think it really goes that far. We are a solution to these challenges that are out there. As entrepreneurs, we have to think more about our employees. We have to think more about, and in doing so, we will reward our capital. I fucking promise you that. And so anyhow, that's a rant, but I just feel like no one's saying it. It's like a lot of this is coming from, there's too much difference between labor and capital, and we need to help the labor take more of a share in when the country wins and our economies win.
Well, amen to that. And thank you very much, Devon. This is obviously a very special and personal talk to have. You've inspired me. You know, I named Ripple after the experience I had in putting a small pebble to start your journey in Turnstyle and watching the waves that it created to impact so many other people's lives. And that's why I called it Ripple Ventures. And I owe my entire career in technology and venture to you. So that means a lot to hear you say that. And I know you live by those words every day. So thank you very much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
And thanks for having me. And honestly, to you and the whole community, I think you're doing wonderful work for the entrepreneurial class out there, out in Toronto and beyond. I got to give you credit and just say thanks for spending so much time with your teams, because every entrepreneur, or sorry, VC loves to say, oh yeah, we're different because we really like invest in our entrepreneurs, and then a lot of the times that just means with money. And I think you do give a lot of time to the team and to your teams, both with advice and support to like build their decks and to help them think through tough challenges, but also to the community with this type of work with the tank and making sure that you're doing your best to surface best practices for everyone and sharing them broadly. So yeah, thanks. I really appreciate it. And I love watching what you're doing. So keep it up.